Episode 5 begins in the morning, where the cruelty of the architecture down in the Coruscant Council estate continues. The scene opens with Syril Karn in stasis. He is dressed, upright, and awake, yet functionally inert, seated on the edge of his bed as if awaiting instruction. He appears to be moping. Coruscant presses in on all sides. You can feel the mass of it. For only 1 second, the sun cuts through the concrete canopy of Coruscant's lower levels and shines into the flat. It is abrupt, narrow, and short-lived, the product of orbital mechanics and architectural occlusion. When it hits Syril's face, we can see he's been crying. For that one moment, the light appears to offer him some solace, hope perhaps, and then it's gone, leaving him bereft again. This might be the one moment every day that the home is blessed with direct sunlight, which is sad, but what might be sadder still is that Syril, assuming he grew up here, may know when the 1 second of sun comes at this time of year. He may have been waiting for it. One of the themes of this scene is carried over from the rebel plot in episode 4, scarcity, domestic this time, scarcity of light, of humour, of love. But ultimately the real theme echoes that of the whole show. Once again it's about control, power and powerlessness. What follows is both emasculation and infantilization, and suddenly Syril makes a lot more sense. We move from the bedroom to the dining table, and the claustrophobia shifts from physical to psychological. Syril is staring disdainfully at a piece of his cereal. The gesture shows a man whose instinct is still procedural and judgmental, but whose field of control has collapsed to the trivial. They are seated in a plastic booth that mimics a diner but feels like an interrogation room. Eedy Karn, my paternal grandmother's name by the way, Eedy not Karn, she's quite something. She can't be more than 5 foot tall, yet dominates everything around her. She's got a voice like she smoked 40 death sticks a day during her teens and 20s, but speaks with a very precise, carefully enunciated accent that sounds like an imitation of the upper class. An imitation which is so practiced it long ago became her default way of speaking. She comes to breakfast dressed nicely, hair perfectly in place, makeup on, dripping with jewellery, and you just know that's not because Syril has turned up. She has breakfast like that every day. Her home isn't anything special, but it's spotlessly clean and tidy, and she clearly takes a lot of pride in it. Everything about her is proper. Appearances are everything. So she doesn't ask him how he slept. She attacks his silhouette. "You're slouching," she drawls. "Is that how you've been presenting yourself to the world?" It's a devastating opening salvo. To Eedy and to the empire she idolizes, presentation is everything. If you look like a leader, you are one. If you slouch, you are nothing. She is essentially restaging him, correcting his posture like he's a mannequin that fell over in a shop window. And the thing is, she's wrong. He never slouched. Nobody stood up straighter than Syril. Posture is treated as evidence, and evidence as diagnosis. From the first beat, Syril is not addressed as someone who has suffered a setback, but as someone whose internal discipline has decayed. Leadership, Eedy insists, is habitual. Failure, therefore, cannot be attributed to circumstance. By reframing his dismissal as a personal lapse rather than an institutional rupture, she has shut down any defense that relies on external causality. Whatever happened, she's letting him know that it's definitely his fault. She extends this logic via imagined public gaze, inventing a sign that Syril might as well be wearing. This is surveillance without observation, a totalizing account of how he is perceived, delivered without reference to any actual witness. The effect is not to describe the world, but to monopolize its interpretation. She defines Syril's public identity for him, and defines it downward. Normally, nagging is quite intense in delivery. The person doing the nagging often doesn't have real authority, so the nagging needs momentum. It needs to overwhelm. Eedy's unusual in that she does it with this languid drawl and leaves appreciable time for it to sink in before moving on to the next criticism. A sign, I think, of her complete mastery over her son. It also makes it sound like each criticism is a sigh of disappointment. Kind of, "Look what you're making me do, Syril. If you weren't such a failure, I wouldn't have to be saying these terrible things." When Syril responds, pointing out that she could have visited him when he was flourishing, he reaches instinctively for a procedural defense. He invokes an open invitation, a standing offer, an available spare room. When he recalls it, it sounds like a reminder, but for him it's also a lament. I had a spare room. He was successful enough to have surplus living space, and now he's here. Eedy dismantles that instantly by invoking a rule of social conduct. An open invitation, she claims, is no invitation at all. The move is familiar from bureaucratic systems where formal possibility is dismissed in favor of unspoken protocol and responsibility is reassigned retroactively. What Syril believed to be generosity is reframed as historic negligence. She transforms his greatest achievement, independence, into evidence of his maternal neglect. She's a master of weaponized etiquette. From here, the scene tightens. Eedy introduces the term prospect, a word drawn from assessment regimes rather than family discourse. The future is rendered as a set of measurable outcomes, and Syril is judged to have none. Eedy counters not with facts but with intuition, saying, "I know what you tell me, I intuit the rest." Evidence is unnecessary, inference suffices. She claims authority over his life in the same way an intelligence service claims authority over a suspect. Partial data, confidently extrapolated. Syril's attempts at resistance are rhetorical and brittle. His sarcasm acknowledges her power even as it gestures towards critique. When he mocks her predictive powers, she reframes mockery itself as failure. The key question of whether he has even a single prospect is framed in binary terms. There is no allowance for uncertainty, recovery, or time. Syril's reply, "I'll find a way," is aspirational but non-operational. It contains no mechanism, no leverage, no plan. It cannot compete with Eedy's certainty. When she announces she is calling Uncle Harlow, the scene pivots decisively. Authority exits Syril entirely. This is not presented as a discussion or a proposal, but as a decision already taken. Syril attempts to puncture the plan by introducing doubt. Will Harlow remember her? Will he speak to her? But Eedy does not engage. She dismisses the objections with amusement. The asymmetry is complete. Syril's challenges do not require rebuttal because they are no longer relevant to the decision-making process. Eedy's account of the call reframes delay as virtue. She will be respected, she claims, for having waited so long, for having been prudent about asking for help. The family favor is cast as a carefully husbanded resource, deployed only at the point of necessity. This mirrors elite bureaucratic cultures in which influence is informal, personalized, and unapologetically hierarchical. Also, it's not a favor, it's the favor. All these years and we never needed it until you screwed it up. Now the favor's gone. Look what you cost me, boy, is what she seems to be saying. The language she uses to describe the outcome is telling. She will ask for someone who will take you on. Syril is no longer a candidate, an applicant, or even an employee. He is a placement, a ward. Custodial language replaces professional language, and his agency contracts accordingly. When she concludes that Uncle Harlow will know what's best, the final remainder of Syril's autonomy is removed. The scene ends with a gesture so passive-aggressive it deserves its own monument. Eedy slides a plate of exotic, spiky fruit across the table toward him. She doesn't speak. The way she does it is comically light touch, like how you'd slide a tray of food under the door of a cell that houses a psychotic gorilla. The movement says, "Don't mind me." She's being what she thinks is subtle. "I'm not going to tell you to eat your fruit, I'm just going to gently slide it over and step back to watch." It's a gesture of care performed with the subtext of threat. It's weaponized nutrition. "Eat, comply, be managed," the gesture says, "because you are a child and I am the provider and you will consume what I give you, the fruit and the job." Syril stares at the fruit, then at her. He is trapped in the booth, trapped in the amber light, and trapped in the debt of a family favor that he never asked for. The gesture completes the scene's reclassification of him from disciplined officer to dependent subject. What the scene ultimately establishes is that Syril's loss of institutional authority does not free him from control, it merely relocates it. The bureaucratic logic that judged him, assessed him, and expelled him from Primor is reproduced almost seamlessly in the domestic sphere. Evaluation persists, surveillance persists, decision-making with him out of the loop persists. Syril is materially provided for, emotionally constrained, and strategically dispossessed. The scene closes not on crisis but on containment. Nothing explodes, no argument is won. A future is quietly reassigned off-screen and Syril remains seated and inert, a little boy, compliant and no longer consulted in his own life. It's the evening at Eedy's, or the next morning, it's not clear. Either way, Cyril's eating the cereal again. I wondered if this was another form of moping, like a teenager who won't leave their room and only wants to eat Cocoa Pops for 4 days. But he clearly finds it somewhat unappetizing, so I actually think this is her work, part of her infantilization campaign. especially if it is the evening, which for some reason I'm convinced it is. I know we've just had some evening scenes in this episode, but they're on different planets, so that doesn't necessarily follow. While the earlier breakfast scene displaced decision-making outward, this one returns with the consequences of that displacement already settled, already interpreted, and already weaponized. The first line establishes the power geometry immediately. "I needn't tell you how wrong you were about Uncle Harlow" opens with a verdict. The phrasing presumes Syril's error as fact before any detail is supplied. The content of the call is secondary. What matters is that Syril's doubts have been retroactively invalidated. His reply, "But you will," recognizes this dynamic. He's acknowledging that narration itself is now an instrument of control. Eedy's report of Uncle Harlow's opinion is tellingly indirect. She distills his view into a single evaluative judgment. Police work was never Syril's chosen path. The wording subtly removes agency from Syril while appearing to describe it. If it was not his chosen path, then his failure is reframed not as incompetence or injustice, but simple misalignment, a moral error rather than a procedural one. Syril's sarcasm, "'cause he knows me so well," attempts to challenge the authority of this assessment, but Eedy immediately converts that challenge into culpability. And whose fault is that? Knowledge gaps become Syril's responsibility. Her next line, "Perhaps you'll study Uncle Harlow with more energy in the future," is brutal. Relationships are framed as curricula. Influence is something to be researched, cultivated, and optimized. It's not maternal advice, it's elite social instruction. Eedy isn't offended that Syril lacks intimacy with his uncle, she's disappointed that he's failed to manage an asset. When Syril asks what field Uncle Harlow thinks he should pursue, he appears to be seeking clarity, albeit with a healthy dose of doubt. What he receives instead is delay. Eedy reports that Harlow wanted to think about it. The decision is deferred, but the hierarchy is reinforced. The absence of an answer keeps Syril in suspension. The most revealing passage comes in Eedy's account of how she described Syril's downfall. She tells Harlow how sorry he was. She stresses that the mistake was large enough to be deeply educational. Failure, epic failure, is reclassified as pedagogy. Punishment is reframed as growth. Eedy harmonizes with the system that rejected Syril. His response that he overheard her side of it briefly punctures the illusion of benevolent mediation. The call wasn't private. His life was discussed audibly, narratively, and unilaterally. Yet even this intrusion does not restore his footing. Eedy shows no embarrassment, no recalibration. The breach is irrelevant because consent was never part of the process. Her final line, "He knows how much we're counting on him," completes the scene's logic. The plural pronoun is crucial. "We" binds Syril to Eedy's strategy whether he agrees or not. Counting on Harlow is framed as necessity. The emotional weight of hope is shifted upward, away from Syril's agency and towards an absent benefactor whose goodwill must be earned. His future is now subject to deliberation elsewhere, narrated by someone else and justified in language he didn't choose. What presents as maternal advocacy is, in practice, administrative custody. The final time we see Syril in this episode, he's a man alone, in the dark, with a single object of focus. Captain Drachma is fixated once more on his arc whale. The hollow projector is held close, he cradles it. Cassian's face rotates slowly, glowing in the dark. The object of his focus is a person who now exists for him only as an unresolved problem. Cassian's image is static, ghostly, and incomplete, order that has not yet been restored. Syril does not yet know how Cassian fits into his life, but he knows that he must. What the scene establishes is the redirection of Syril's need for structure. Deprived of institutional authority and domestically managed into passivity, his sense of purpose begins to reconstitute itself around pursuit. Cassian becomes a stabilizing axis. The scene ends without resolution but with alignment. Syril's future orientation, previously outsourced to Uncle Harlow and deferred indefinitely, snaps into a single silent focus. In the absence of permission, he finds an object. In the absence of authority, he finds a target. What his Episode 5 arc does to Syril is distillation. Everything external is stripped away until only the essential mechanism remains. The episode removes role, audience, and institutional context to see what remains once those supports are gone. And what remains is a very specific orientation toward order. Across the episode, Syril is repeatedly placed in situations where authority is present but inaccessible, environmental rather than human. procedural rather than negotiable, deferred rather than enacted. Crucially, he is never given a clear antagonist or a clean injustice to react against. Instead, he is left in proximity to systems that function without him. That absence is the pressure. Syril isn't reacting to cruelty, he's reacting to irrelevance. What becomes clear, taken as a whole, is that Syril does not need power in the usual sense. He needs legibility. He needs a world that can be read, evaluated, and made to make sense through the correct application of rules. When that world withdraws, when judgment is outsourced, delayed, or rendered atmospheric rather than explicit, his response is not rebellion or withdrawal but compression. He reduces the scale of the world until it fits his cognitive reach. That is why the episode keeps shrinking his field of action. When Syril stares intently at a piece of his cereal, I think it's a precursor to the scene where he's staring at Cassian's hollow that evening. It's no accident that it looks like a little planet. He's thinking of Ferrix, the place that put him here. For a brief moment, he imagines it as puny in its powerful grip before discarding it with a plop. By the end, the only thing that remains fully comprehensible to him is a single tiny face, isolated from context, rotating endlessly, offering no resistance and no ambiguity. Cassian becomes meaningful because he represents a problem small enough to be solved, a failure that can be named, an error that can be corrected. By the end of the episode, he's used the last sliver of his agency to select a target, and realized that he no longer needs permission to enforce order in the galaxy.